So, good morning and good evening, everyone. This is Niladri Choudhuri, CEO of Excellentro, the Chief Organizer for DevOps India Summit. As part of our DevOps for Executive initiative, we are having this panel discussion with the elite panel, and the topic is interesting. That is about the productivity during, before, and after the pandemic. And let's see what everyone has to say. So we have with us Dr. Tapabrata Pal, Senior Director and Senior Distinguished Engineer, Capital One. He started and have been leading Capital One's DevOps, DevSecOps, CI/CD journey, created and evangelized software delivery clean room concept to modernize software delivery compliance, industry thought leader in the areas of DevOps, DevSecOps, and modernizing software delivery, industry thought leader in the areas of, and he is a speaker. He's part of the programming committee of the DevOps Enterprise Summit and various other eminent programs, including DevOps India Summit. We have with us Archana Joshi, Global Head Engineering Transformation, L&T Infotech, software engineering and IT transformation professional, working with organizations to bring in new ways of working using Agile and DevOps. Archana has worked with Fortune 100 enterprise clients across diverse industry domains like manufacturing, banking and finance, insurance, and telecommunication. Member of the Leader Excellence at Harvard Square. Her focus areas are software program and project management, agile lean methodologies, and DevOps strategy planning and transformation, digital transformations. We have Padma Satyamurthy, Enterprise Transformation Leader at Walmart. Senior leader with 25 plus years of experience in both Fortune 50 as well as startups and unicorns in diverse leadership roles across delivery, operating, and strategy. So Padma possesses a multi-domain expertise in retail, healthcare, BFSI, and industrial automation, as well as expertise in business and digital transformation, delivery leadership, strategic business development, product and portfolio planning. Over the last decade, she has been deeply engaged in large, complex transformation through driving changes in culture, people, technology, and capabilities, as well as operating models. Passionate about startup ecosystem and mentor and expert advisor on accelerator programs, including mass challenges. Other than that, we have Gary Gruver, and he doesn't need a mention. He has been one of the stalwarts changing the HP's way of working and moving them into a more profitable situation. Today, he is the founder of Gruver Consulting, and his latest book and also the new trainings is for the organization change management. And yes, he is an expert in the area of helping organizations to transform. We also have Sanjeev Sharma, but unfortunately, something got escalated to him in his work. So I'm not introducing him now till such time he joins, if he is able to join. So with this, thanks everyone for joining and giving your time here. It's an interesting point to be discussed today, which is productivity. And I generally tend to take a more neutral and subtle kind of the approach, but today I might change my approach also um, coming forth to the panel. So the first thing that I would like to understand from Dr. Pal and then to Archana and Padma as to what you think is productivity. Why are we so bothered about productivity at this point of time? So before getting into the why, what does that mean to you? So over to Dr. Pal.
Yes, so to be honest, if I have to formulate an equation or formulate an equation or something like that, I won't be able to. So it will be as fuzzy as we all know about it. So productivity in regular sense is just how much people are producing, right? And the question becomes, what does that measure up to? What is the unit of that? How do you measure? When do you measure? What are the techniques and all that? And all these are unknown. And I know that we have been talking about it for a while in DevOps transformation sense. However, it has become very, very contextual and important in today's world, given the scenario we are in. Everybody is locked in home and doing work as well as many other things. So how does productivity, quote unquote, kind of scale up or scale down in those scenarios? I do not have a good way to measure. I don't think that anybody does. At least I would like to know if there is a way to measure, and I would like to use that kind of measurement. But overall, as we all understood, is productivity as in like how many study points are produced per whatever, per cycle, sprint cycle, or how many business features are delivered to production, so on and so forth. I think those measurements are roughly there. There was nothing new. Whoever measured whatever way is still measuring the way, but I think in terms of today's world, the productivity has a different kind of dimension to it. Sometimes it may get conflated with the amount of hours that you are spending on Zoom, for example, or on troubleshooting something, or even your working hours. None of those actually directly, it may correlate to productivity, but none of those are direct measurement of productivity in general. So to answer your questions, I really do not know how to measure productivity, but I do have some opinions, and I'd like to know what others think.
Great. So let us go to Archana.
Okay. I echo sentiments by Dr. Pal saying productivity is as fuzzy as it can get. In my mind, it's function of three things, right? How much, how good, and how relevant, right? How much could be is the amount that you produce. How good is it doesn't matter if you produced 100 things but they are of really bad quality, so how good whatever you're producing is, and how relevant. So let's say if I produced 100 pencils but the person on the other end wanted a pen, no amount is going to help me say that I've done a good job or a productive way of doing things. It could in normal sense, it could be that you've been very productive, saying you've produced 100 pencils out of the amount with minimal waste and all of that of the raw material, but it's not relevant, right? So in my mind, when businesses look at productivity, and people love to measure that, not just in IT, you will see that. I mean, we talk about governments and we say, hey, our government did a great job because they did all of these kind of things, or they did a bad job because they used our tax dollars and didn't do anything about it. They were not as much productive or effective, right? So productivity is, I would say, something which gives people comfort, because that's a proxy of knowing how good, how much, and how relevant you're working and producing. So in some shape or form, you have to deal with it. So while there are schools of thought saying, hey, you should not measure productivity, I'm of the opinion that you need to measure it, but don't go overboard by it saying this is the only thing that we need to look at, right? So as I said, it's a comfort feeling. We need to definitely look at it. And in my mind, at least, it could be any metrics which kind of look at these three things, which is how good you are, how much are you producing, and how relevant are you producing. So if it's agile, it could be your story points. If it's an infrastructure project, it could be number of cloud instances you're deploying. If it is some other IT work that you are doing, it could be around the business value that you are delivering. It could be different connotations based on the system or the work that you are doing. And that's how, in my mind, is the first start towards productivity, and then we can keep on adding complexity based on the situation that we are in. So that's my quick take to start with.
Thanks, Archana. Let's also hear Padma, and then we'll go to carry on a different question.
Yeah, I think Dr. Pal and Archana kind of spoke everything that I wanted to speak about the definition of productivity. So I had definitely echo what they are saying. like Dr. Pal said, I really do not have a formula that says X plus Y. If you get divided by Z, then that's the formula for the productivity. And if it's on a trajectory on the higher trend, then that means we are in the right direction. And if it's downward trend, then we are not productive. So I do not think there is a definition that exists like that. And I would definitely love to know if there is a decoded definition that somebody has found for it. So what productivity we are looking at? I mean, productivity as a definition has also evolved, thankfully, over the last 10, 15 years when we were starting our careers, and how productivity was measured either in function points or in the kilo lines of code that we used to produce or anything from there to where we are today. I think we are at least in the right direction of looking productivity a lot more holistically, like what Archana was talking about. Not just productivity, but are we making any relevance to the business? Is business leveraging anything out of the work that we are producing? Is there an ROI to what we are producing? And are we able to translate into a clear dollar or any other value that we want to achieve through it? So a productivity definition itself has evolved, and what organizations are also, I'm seeing large and large organizations going towards is they are not sticking to a one definition for productivity, but rather they are going towards more democratizing and even autonomizing the whole definition and asking teams, hey, what do you think productivity for your teams or programs look like? Tell us that and we will help you what you want to achieve. So from that perspective, the productivity definition itself has evolved, and I am seeing that it's going to evolve a lot more in the coming couple of more years. And pandemic has taught us so much to look at productivity in a very different thing. So we had to make really big paradigm shifts in the priorities and other things when pandemic hit us, and the way we were working, the what we wanted to produce, what plan we had at the beginning of the year to what we actually delivered towards the end. The entire prioritization changed. So how do you measure productivity in an unpredictable environment that we were hit upon? So that way, productivity, I don't think will have a single definition where you can decode and say, hey, this is exactly productivity. But I think collectively we all can come together and give a decent meaning to it, where it is no more looked at a very negative sense as, oh my God, they measure productivity, which means they do not value human. At least that's hopefully going to go away in the next couple of years, hopefully.
Thanks. Let's go to Gary. And my question to Gary is, when you're looking at, I mean, he has done remarkable achievements in transforming large organizations. And I would like to ask Gary in terms of what was productivity for those transformations, or did you even look at productivity in any way in those transformations?
Yeah, I think at HP it was key. So real bit back to my definition of productivity is we always want to get more done. There's always more to get done than we have the capacity to do, and we're always constrained by money. So as leaders in organizations, we should be trying to get as much done as we possibly can. Now, it's hard to measure because, and there's different parts of it. There's a part of it where an individual is sitting down with a business person trying to come up with a problem that they need solved and creating that. And that's the creative work of software. And every time it's a different size, it's a different shape. So that part's really hard to measure. But what I've found that gets really easy to measure is we want people spending all their time doing that. But what we find is we have engineers spending a lot of time doing other stuff. They're debugging and triaging environment issues. They're debugging and triaging deployment issues. They're getting feedback on code that they changed that had an unintended consequences months later, and all that's waste that's slowing down flow. So I've really shifted my approach to sort of saying, no, we need to focus on the waste that's slowing down flow and slowing down productivity, because that's very measurable, it's very quantifiable. We can do an experiment, we can remove it, and we can show the benefits that we've had to the business. So that works really well, and that's kind of what I've gone to, is I've quit trying to measure productivity, but I've gotten very good at measuring the waste that's slowing down productivity, and I can run experiments and focus on doing things that way. At HP, we were really able to measure productivity very well because we had a fixed number of products that we were doing. And we were spending a lot of our times just porting the code from one product to another and getting it out the door. And we had a fixed amount of money that we were spending. So after transforming that organization, it was easy to go back and look at it and say, now I'm supporting 140% more products. I'm spending half the amount of money because I went through the last downturn during 2008. And the amount of my capacity that used to be porting from one product to another, and I only had 5% of my capacity for innovation, went to 40%. And so I could just measure the percentage of time on new features and new capabilities versus the mundane work of porting, qualifying, getting it out the door. So that was an easy opportunity to show productivity improvements. And my co-author, Mike Youngwood, said we got 10x productivity improvement in terms of being able to get stuff done and builds and that type of things. But from a business results, being able to have 40% more capacity or 8x improvement in feature throughput, or, you know, it wasn't feature throughput, it was the amount of time that people spent on features. And then we were supporting, you know, 140% more products at half the cost. 2 to 3x business productivity, I would say. But as I go into other organizations now and I try to measure it, when you're trying to work on a website or a capability like that, and you've got a stack of features coming at you, they're all different sizes, they're all different shapes. We can't really measure lines of code turmoil because we'll write bad code and get wrong behavior. Story points is terrible because I can game that system too. So I've really gotten to the point where I want people doing as much of that as they possibly can, and anything else that's slowing them down, anytime they're debugging and triaging a large complex system, we should have fixed that by going to smaller batch sizes. So I measure the waste that's slowing it down, and have gotten away from measuring productivity.
It's a nice point of view, and I've seen those figures that has changed in HP. Getting into that 40%, I think it was around 23% additional budget which was available, which could be used for doing things better. That's what came after the change, right? Uh, I remember
It went from 5% of the capacity to 4% of the capacity doing the features.
yeah.
So 8x improvement.
So, picking up from the points that you have all mentioned, one of the point that I think that comes to my mind is one, it's not just people doing the work which is about productivity. For people to be productive, there is a lot more factors which is associated with this. Like, for example, what is the technical debt that is already there? Because if we do not take care of those, as Gary says, there is a waste which is happening. People are wasting time on doing things. The second point, which again another factor which I'm trying to bring up is which I think Microsoft also has put up a white paper on, is about the new features. We have been known to understand that we have to keep pushing new features out, and that's where the point that comes in is only 33% of the new feature, that is one third of the new features, is only which is useful, which brings a positive impact. But there is still another 33% or one third which is neutral. So whether that feature is there or not, the customer is not happy or sad. But there is also one third of the features which the custom makes the customer irritated, makes the customer even leave your product. So is that important, or is focusing on delivering something or taking care of things which you know 100% is going to bring a outage is a more important work? Now from that point of view, when you bring this aspect into it, to Dr. Pal, how do you look at productivity now, where we are not looking at only the lines of code or the features that we are bringing in, but we are trying to bring stability and resilience to the system?
So I think those are different dimensions of what you produce, right? And new feature delivery is a measure of, you know, if you can measure it correctly, is a measure of what you deliver business value with. Uh, Fixing production issues and other bugs are way to reduce the technical days. It's another dimension. Now, I will not say that a particular developer spending time on technical dates or reducing technical dates is not productive. In fact, that person may be more productive than a person delivering new features that the customers don't care about. So in that sense, it's different dimensions that come together. And again, as I said, there's no single equation that I can find that measures, y is a function of x, y, z, and x, z, a, b, c, and all that stuff. But yes, those are different elements that come into play. But I think there is more to more there in the whole productivity discussion. I mean, there's a good study done by Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, on just by looking at GitHub commits and GitHub issues. I may send you that link offline, and then she presented in October, I think. Uh, and very nice and interesting conclusions out of that, that not only talks about delivering new features, but inherently it has new, measurements around technical dates and, cleaning up code, writing functional tests or tests, and, even discussing issues is a measure of productivity, right? So it's not that, being productive means you have a measurable end result, right? It's the whole overall effect that you're bringing in your product space. Are you making the product better? And I think I agree with what Gary just said, that maybe instead of measuring how much productivity you have increased, you should measure how much waste you have reduced. So, since we know that, measuring productivity is very difficult, we know that we can identify wastes very easily, like, attending 1 hour stand up, right? That's a waste. So cutting down waste means that we are increasing productivity, but now doing to measure how much productivity has been increased by that, probably don't. So I think cutting down waste is a good measure of increase in productivity. I agree with Gary. That's a good thought.
Thanks, Dr. Pal. So let's hear what Archana has to say on this.
So, Niladri, I call what is happening with us nowadays, I call it as a productivity paradox, right? And this is a concept which is not new. It was there in 70s and 80s, and it was also that time called as Sodao paradox, which said that, hey, there was a study that was done in US saying that with the advent of computers being coming in, is it helping people being more productive or is it slowing them down, right? And of course, as you can imagine, there were different results, schools of thought, which is there. And something similar is happening nowadays, right? And I'll tell you why. Just to give you an example, the productivity paradox that we are in today is in many organizations, the culture is that if I send an email, I expect an immediate response or a reply. Or similarly, that's kind of an inherent, I would say, expectation that we also have. Hey, someone sends me a WhatsApp, my friend has sent me, and I don't get the response immediately. I'll kind of ping, I'll pick up the phone, I'll start talking, or I'll start an email. And this kind of things happens, this behavior happens in organizations as well, right? So what happens is every time a developer or anyone is doing their work, you are constantly getting distracted. And every time you get distracted, it's leading to waste because you take time to come back to what you have. And every time you do these kind of things, it will hit your productivity, right? So while organizations today are spending more and more money to make sure that people are productive, which means they are giving them state-of-the-art laptops, they are giving them state-of-the-art facilities, they are giving them real-time data, they are giving them real-time metrics. People are making sure that you get ergonomic chairs where you can sit on and can relax and do work well. But they are not giving people time to slow down. and people get distracted every now and then. So when that happens, it directly hits your productivity. It's going to directly hit the time it takes. And to Gary's point, it's going to increase your work in progress. It's going to lead more and more waste. So I think that's where I say that it's a productivity paradox, because at one point in time, you are giving means, techniques to your employees to do more. At the same time, you are setting a culture and expectation where you are getting distracted and the employees getting distracted more and more. So it kind of evens out, it is kind of balancing out, and hence you keep on getting again and again in the same kind of discussion saying, this was the number of hours the person sat in front of the computer, but I'm not seeing much happening from that person. So it could be because that it's not because the person is not productive. It could be because the person is distracted more. It's because the waste that is leading to it is more. It's because the scenario that you've created, the culture that you've created is pulling the person down. So when you are looking at productivity, you just don't look at those kind of metrics. You look at all these things holistically to say, what am I doing as an organization to truly value my employees and make them productive? And I think more and more organizations realize that it's not just about giving technologies at the hand of employees. It's about also encouraging to slow down and relax and spread that culture. I think that is what will take us in a better direction. That's my opinion here.
Nice. This brings a point to my mind is which I'll go later on to Gary and Dr. Pal on the link between the experimentation and learning to productivity, and which I'll come to that. But before that, I'll go to Padma for the view on what Padma feels about productivity when, and she has been a agile coach in various organizations and has a lot of experience on that. So from that point of view, when you're looking at the agile scenario, the agile framework, the safe framework, and whatever other framework that is there, where we are talking about a self-organizing team, does it really, I mean, to me, it talks about a team which is capable, which is somebody where we can trust to say that they are going to be able to do or work to the best of their ability, knowing the situation at that time, knowing the knowledge and skill set that they have at that time, and what is the constraints that is there at that time. So from that point of view, I would like to know from Padma as to where does productivity fit in, and do we still need to really look at productivity?
Nice analysis, Niladri. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we will ever stop looking at productivity. How much ever we like the word or we don't like the word, or we may want to say how to do it, we will be going to look at it for a long time now. And but the way we are going to look at it is already changing. Like I was talking about, productivity was in fact a input metric for a very long time, right? Like in the last 10-15 years, the organizations felt that if the productivity was good, then everything else about the program or the project or the product development is really good. So they did not worry about anything. The aspects that Archana was bringing out about human element inside of it and other things. But today, what organizations are trying to look at is productivity as an output metric, which means I cannot control productivity directly, and I cannot make people productive just like that by asking them to be more productive. Rather, what can I do? Exactly what Archana was talking about. How can I create an environment that makes my people more productive? And that actually starts with employees being engaged and happy also within the organization. It doesn't just start with the tools that have been given to them, or the the leverage, or the accessibility and the licensing and other things, but more of starts with the employee engagement and the employee happiness within the organization. And then you say, if all these factors, like maybe it could be cloud adoption, tool adoption, practice adoption, including the engagement, and then a good collaboration between business, development, data, everyone else. And if they're all coming together to make the whole work happen, then there is a huge possibility that our productivity might be on the right direction. So it's now becoming a lot more holistic. So we cannot say that by just introducing new features, we are more productive, or by just focusing on reducing the tech debts, we are going to be more productive. It's actually a fine balance of a multiple elements that are coming together, which is going to drive productivity. So the focus is now kind of not directly on productivity, but looking at the ecosystem that will help us to drive productivity within the team, program, and the business unit at the large. So that is where I'm seeing the trend and the direction going towards in organizations. So will a framework help? Will a particular tool help? Will a particular way of doing things help? I don't think there is an answer to that. And we will never have, because what worked for the same team 6 months back may not work now. So from that perspective, I think a continuous evolving, like what Gary was talking about, continuously looking at, hey, what is slowing me down, and going towards and chasing towards making that all right, so that I'm kind of continuously improving myself, is probably, that is, if you want, that could be a good framework. The continuous learning and improvement can be a good framework rather than any other ready-made framework that we are talking about, rather.
So I think Sanjeev is joining. So going to Gary first, in terms of where do you look at learning and experimentation in the whole frame of things for improvement? And the second part is that do you look at a value stream management to be uh, a tool to help in actually improving productivity? Hi, Sanjeev.
Hey, how are you doing? Sorry,
Good evening.
I was trying to be productive somewhere else.
No problem. We'll come back to you. Yes, Gary.
Um, one more time on the question. Sanjeev got me distracted there for a second.
See, this is the distraction that Padma was talking about.
Right.
So my question to Gary is that where does the learning and experimentation fit into improvement of productivity? And number two, do you look at a value stream mapping, a value stream management to be an exercise which helps in looking at productivity better rather than looking at the individual's productivity?
Yeah. I don't necessarily look at the individual's productivity. I look at it, and I don't necessarily call it value stream mapping, although a lot of what I do is a form of value stream mapping. But what I see is a lot of people make mistakes. When I get brought in to review people's value stream maps, I think, well, it's a really good and it's a classic view of how you do value stream mapping, but it really doesn't point out the problems with your software process. So I've really focused more on mapping the deployment pipeline to identify waste and issues that are slowing you down. So that's where I spend my time and focus, and trying to make that waste visible. And then, you're going to have to create a culture where it's okay to try and fail. But instead of doing a big, long, let's commit to a big, long transformation, let's commit to a bunch of little smaller iterations, and let's give the people capacity to experiment. What do we see happen? What I see happen in most organizations is they're so focused on productivity, they want to make sure the engineers are busy every minute of the time, and the business people are making sure that they're focused on the most business value. And that's how we create huge piles of technical debt. People know what needs to be done. They know what needs to be improved. They're just not allowed to do it. And can you imagine what Tiacho Ono would say if he knew people were knew what needed to be improved, but they weren't allowed to do it? I mean, he'd be rolling over in his grave, because it's not. And we need to give people the capacity and allow them to do it. And, I think going through the PMO and doing major things is important, but we need to leave some percent of the capacity for people to experiment and learn, and they're not all going to work. And that's why I like the metrics of waste, because if you just say, yeah, we're going to give you this capacity and you do whatever you want, you're not going to show the value of what you did invested in back to the business. And they're going to say, no, I need to drive you to 100% capacity again. But if you're able to show, no, with the capacity you gave me, I was able to make this improvement, and I was able to save this amount of waste and inefficiencies in the organization, then you're going to be allowed to invest more. So I really think that, yes, we can experiment, less we can learn, but we need a way to measurement. And Padma and I are going to spend some time after this trying to figure out how each team that wants to get a green belt is going to be able to measure and quantify $10,000 worth of waste that they're able to eliminate out of the organization, how they're able to quantify it, how they're able to measure it and go after it. And yeah, not everything they're going to try is going to work the first time, but if we break it into small iterations to where they can learn and adjust, over time, they're going to go the right direction and get the right improvements.
Thanks, Gary. So let's go to Dr. Pal. And my question to Dr. Pal is, so with the current scenarios, when we are looking at the project to product approach, when we are looking at the Conway's law, so do we think that the more, and just now Gary also talked about looking at it in smaller chunks, does it mean that more decentralization, more autonomy is going to give or bring more productivity to the teams?
Sorry, I was on mute. Absolutely. Autonomy is the key thing in whole transformation, right? A team should be able to decide on their destiny from soup to nuts. They own the product. They decide what needs to be done to the product, and they decide, the whole life cycle of the product. So that's kind of granted besides the productivity discussion, right? It's kind of the basic principle, if you will, or the first principle that you have the product team and they own everything about that product, period. So in that sense, a lot of decentralization has to take place because a company typically will have multiple products and hence multiple product teams that are independent of each other, sort of. But there is a notion of centralized services also, and that is to minimize waste, if you will. You do not want every product team to have their own Kubernetes cluster. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But those are the things to be, you need to think about. You do not want every product team to have their own cloud governance team because number one, it may not be scalable. At the same time, it may be a huge waste. So those are the things. So yes, decentralization overall, but I think there's a central component to everything that we do. It's like a main pipeline, if you will, that runs through the city. But each individual home have their own water supply, and they decide what to do with that water. I think that's where the productivity discussion and the decentralization are, I think, kind of disjointed or maybe orthogonal to some extent. One does not impact the other, in my opinion. I don't know what Gary or Padma or Archana or Sanjeev you think. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I actually think it does, right? Because if one has way too much centralization, then and the centralized team is not as efficient as the product team, the the application delivery teams, they can become a bottleneck. We see that, for example, with security teams all the time. Security teams have so much of a backlog, so much of a and then if they're not staffed properly or they get like yesterday morning, all security teams are on the entire planet were really busy doing something else, right? Thanks to our friends at SolarWinds, and suddenly everything else stopped because of this centralized dependency. So actually, I talk a lot about democratization of services, right? Where the centralized team is making as a service capabilities available for as much as possible via self-service for the product teams to use, application delivery teams to use. But I think there's a balance, right? There's a balance that needs to be achieved. As you say, Topo, it has to do with resource management, but I think it also has to do with if you give, how much freedom is your compliance team willing to let, some of the developers have. But I think it eventually boils down to this balance between, okay, is too much centralization going to create a bottleneck, but too much fragmentation because of lack of centralization also creates a lot of resource waste, as you mentioned. So I think it's a balance, and there's, I've seen at many places where I worked before that pendulum keeps swinging and never seems to find that equilibrium, or takes a very long time to find it.
Go ahead, Niladri.
I just wanted to point out that in the State of DevOps report 2020, I don't know how many of you have seen it. They are talking about having the platform, the elite organizations are using the platform approach, but they are looking at it as a product. And so it's more like if I look at from the team topologies point of view, it's more like an enablement team. So that's where that balance comes in. And there is the product, which is the platform that you are having, which is the centralized team, but they are providing it in the right way for the individual teams to consume.
Yeah, that's the
What I
platform
was
team in team topologies, right? That is the platform team, right? Which is
Yeah.
they own the central services, right? Sorry, Topo, I spoke over you. Apologies.
no. What I was trying to say is that I was taking the independence of product teams as the first principle, like no negotiation on that. But if I going back to what you are saying, Sanjeev, is that if there was a cyber team or information security team and they become the bottleneck, if you measure the productivity of that team, you'll find high productivity. Everybody is busy. But overall, if you look at the productivity for the products they are supporting, maybe then you can see. So that's why I was saying that they are orthogonal measurements, because localized productivity measurement may be a false positive.
I see what you're saying. Very true. Very true.
You do not want your centralized teams to be productive. You want your centralized teams to have overcapacity, because if you're focused on them being productive, they become the bottleneck for the entire organization. If you have excess capacity, you're speeding up all the other organizations, and so you don't want them to be productive.
I like that. I like that, Gary. We should have a conversation just on that topic. I really like that. Okay, I'm done, guys. I got my gem of the day.
That's Don Reinerstein's thing, right? That's in his book. I referenced it in my latest one. Yeah, centralized resources should have excess capacity.
So let me come to one more point. I'll start with Archana here. And the point is on the productivity of the leadership. And from that point of view, what I see regularly when I'm interacting with the leaders is 60 to 80% of their time is going on meetings. So my question is, are those part of the productive work? Number one. Number two, like when we decide on availability, that calculation always takes into point that what is the accepted hour. So if you are talking about 8 hours per day, then you will look at if anything goes down within that 8 hours. But if it is a 24 hours per day, then we look at anything that happens anytime. So in this case, when we look at productivity, do we minus that whole 80% of the day's time that the leader spends on meetings, and then have the additional 8 hours or 9 hours of productive thing?
So I would say, Niladri, that's a very touchy subject. I'm sure all the leaders on this call will have different answers to it. You're right. Yes, leaders do spend a lot of times on meetings, and you often hear them say, all my days went in meetings, I didn't do any work. Yeah, you may hear statements like that. But to the point that I would try and also say is, if the leader's job is to give direction, and if that means of giving the direction is through meeting, it may not necessarily be the right way of giving direction. You can always do asynchronous communication. You don't have to have synchronous every single time with all the people in the room. But if that is a way of sending direction, then it shouldn't be considered as waste of your time or unproductive, because that's one of the roles that you have to perform. That's one thing. But having said that, you also see to the point of centralization and decentralization, and I'll go back there, saying that if, to Gary's point, if the leader has been able to delegate properly, decentralize some of the decisions, is able to do things leader will have time in his or her hand to focus on strategic initiatives, forward looking things. And that can always happen if you follow the principle that Gary laid down, saying you are a central team, you don't want to be that roadblock. If you don't want to be that, make sure you are not as much occupied by decentralizing some of the decisions, empowering your team, creating an environment for the team where they can figure out things for themselves and figure out, I would say, areas where they can be productive. And I think that's where most of the leaders, I wouldn't call it fail, but don't focus on. And you see these statements coming all day long saying I was in meetings and now I'm going to do my work, right? And that's not a very good sign of a leader. And I don't know what others would say, but that's my view. And I'm also myself guilty to it, where many a times I also say that, but I hope I continue to improve and be more productive, if I may say so.
Thanks, Archana. Let's go to Sanjeev and hear his thoughts on this.
I think, I think the definition of productivity is what is productive hours versus what what are tasks are productive versus non-productive. It is very subjective, right? Like I was doing some work with a defense contractor, and for defense contractors, the documentation piece, because of the requirements which they have, is you know extremely productive part of their work. They consider it. Whereas, if you talk to a developer working at a startup and you ask them, how much time did you spend writing documentation? He's like, the least I can. The code is my documentation. That's what they say, right? So I think that it is extremely subjective. Filling out compliance forms is very productive. A productive part. You want to minimize it, but it is important if you're working in a regulated industry. So I think it's a very subjective term. As far as meetings are concerned, I think it depends on what I'm relate to what Archana was saying, right? I mean, if I look at my calendar, it looks like a Tetris game gone bad because there are so many meetings on it, and I'm going, when am I supposed to work? But that is work, right? It depends on your role, depends on how the culture of the company where you work is. That is work, right? The question is, are you able to shield the people for whom it is not work from being non-productive because of work, right? So one of my edicts for my team is, don't invite everybody. Because you see so many teams, people will just invite like 30 people to a call. I'm like, why are 30 people needed for this, right? So having that squad mentality, who are the 7 people I need on this call to make a decision? What's the minimum number of people I need? What's the minimum number of meetings? Can I make this meeting 45 minutes instead of 1 hour? So it gives 15 minutes for people to do other stuff. So I think those are the kind of techniques we as leaders can use to try to shield our people and give them some slack time, so they are not spending all their time in non-productive meetings, which are non-productive for them. Might be productive for us because we need that update. We need the data to make the decision. And then, of course, then moving towards more automation. So I don't have to get an update from a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint deck which somebody has to make, but from a live dashboard, which I can go look at and say, okay, this is all the information I need to make a decision. I hope that helps.
Sure. So let's go to Padma.
I mean, my question is, if you are complaining that your meetings are so unproductive, you are the leader, you have the so-called power. Why can't you just cancel it and do something more productive then? Why are you in a meeting and then calling it such an unproductive day for yourself? So I feel that there is a slight amount of hypocrisy here when a leader usually walks out and says, hey, I was in a meeting all through and now I have to start my work, which means you are setting an example that meetings are unproductive or meetings can be unproductive. And we are not doing anything, but we are still holding it because maybe somebody else was doing it 2 years back and we are continuing the tradition. So we have to break that. So I'll go back to what Gary also said. If a leader is in the bracket of centralized team, then we really don't want them to be productive also, right? They become bottlenecks. So then if they're not productive, maybe it's good for us if they're not really productive also in that sense. But my take is that meetings can be very productive. You can make meetings very productive, and you can um, even decentralize the meetings itself, saying, hey, you guys carry on, because I can take this input anywhere else, maybe in a centralized way of looking at a document or a board or something, and I'll take that from, but let me not be here because I want to be somewhere else. So while this meeting is productive, I can't be here, but I'll be somewhere else doing something more productive for my role, but you continue with this. So that delegation is also super critical. I would definitely not like a leader saying that my whole day was in meetings, so which means I was unproductive. We are actually sending wrong signals to the entire organization by making such statements. So I think that's also very careful. The leaders have to be very careful how they talk about their meeting time and how they inculcate that culture of meeting and no meeting culture within the organization. It goes back to Conway's law, right? Your communication structure is how your organization is structured. So the product development structure works on that same structure of your communication structure. So if you go by that, I think meetings can be made productive, but it needs to be right people need to be right in the right meeting so it can be actually productive. So we have to prioritize on that piece as well.
Dr. Pal.
Right. So I think, one of the basic thing about measuring productivity, if there is a measurement, is the understanding of what is expected of you. So what are you expected to produce is the first thing, right? So developers are expected to produce lines of code, whatever that measurement, even though I don't agree with that lines of code kind of measurement, but I just took a random example. So I think from leaders' perspective, the expectation of a leader is to allow the people around you or in your organization make the right decision and sometimes vet the decision, right? In that sense, you are expected to meet with your team members and help them guide and coach and make them the right decision. In that sense, meeting is not unproductive. But if you have a meeting, you better understand what is the outcome of the meeting or expected outcome of the meeting. If we have met the outcome, then it is a productive meeting. But having 24 people in a room calling it stand up and going nowhere is not a productive meeting, because right from the get-go, you didn't set an expectation or what you expect out of the meeting. So meeting is good or bad dependent upon two things, I think, in my mind: what is expected out of that meeting and who are in that meeting. So if we can control those things and measure those things, then we can call a meeting productive. And hence, if I spend my whole day in meetings, I am basically productive.
Great. Excellent point. So we are nearing the end. So the last question that I have for everyone, starting with Gary, is we all work with a lot of different organizations doing different parts of the work, like the system integrators and vendors, whatever you call them. How do we make sure that everybody works together and is productive as you define productive, or reduce the overall waste? Over to Gary.
I think it starts with making the problem visible. Right. The first thing I start with was, if you go to a manufacturing facility, you can walk the line, you can see inventory building up, you can see everything else. The first step is making the process visible and making it obvious where the waste is. And if everybody just has their own view of what it is based on what they're doing, you're not going to get people to agree on what needs to be improved and what needs to be changed. But if you can make the overall process visible, then I think you can start to get that alignment. And if you can make the waste visible in that overall process, then you can start to get people to agree on the types of things that they want to change and improve. And this is to get people going on the continuous improvement journey. We're going to go after this waste, we're going to go after this, we're going to go after this. And all of a sudden, we're finding organizations are much more productive and aren't being slowed down. So that's kind of where I focus on it and making it visible. And, Topo, I agree with you. If you can get it to the point where people have autonomy, then that's great. Then they're going to be much more productive. But the reality in a lot of our organizations is that we have tightly coupled architectures that require people working together. And for those people to work together effectively, they need to have a common view of how the process works and where the opportunities for improvement are. And if we can't make it visible, we're not going to get people aligned on fixing things.
Thanks, Gary.
Yep.
Dr. Pal.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I agree with Gary that, in real life, we want every product to be quite independent. But as I said previously, that there are certain like base things or shared things or centralized things that everybody depends upon. And those are done to for various reasons, and regulatory compliance, legal requirements, security requirements, and even pure efficiencies. So yes, when you measure productivity, you have to take all of these into account as a whole. And that's why it becomes very complex, and hence I probably would stay away from measuring individual productivity as such. As Gary said, it's the productivity of the product or productivity of the organization or whatever the unit that you can think about is where you should measure productivity. And again, you need to decide on what is expected out of that unit and where the actual output is, and that's your productivity measurement.
Thanks, Padma.
Yeah, I mean, different organizations within the organization, sub-organizations or sub-teams need to come together to be productive. So I'd go with what both Dr. Pal and Gary said, having a common goal or a common vision, making that the hero or the king of the whole gamut, and saying everybody work towards that common outcome that we are expected to. Then I think the whole issue of how many multiple teams are involved in this, how many vendors are involved in this, and how are we going, how distributed are we, and how are we, I think we can kind of start overlooking those real I mean, they are real challenges, but we can start overlooking them to a lot of, in a lot of ways, if the common goal or the common problem statement starts becoming the element to work towards for every single team that we have. So that way, having establishing that at the very beginning of the work plays a big role, and we can actually help towards that.
Great. Uh, so we'll come to the end of it with Sanjeev and Archana. If you can, along with this, highlight a little bit on how does the customer need to also look at, in whatever terms, to ensure that the whole set of SIs and the internal teams and everybody works together in delivering that value, and be much more productive and less reduce waste. So over to Sanjeev.
Okay, so I think one of the most interesting encounters I had regarding this was back at a company. It was an insurance firm I was doing some work at, and their VP of app dev, he had made these T-shirts which said everybody is responsible for delivering business value, and he gave these T-shirts to everybody. He gave it to his developers, testers, contractors, SI people. But then it got really interesting. He went and gave it to his CFO and said, if you don't release funds on time, you are delaying, delivering product, business value. He gave it to the coffee machine guy who used to come and refill the coffee and said, hey, if your coffee machine is broken and people have to walk 20 minutes to the Starbucks, then you are delaying, productivity. He gave it to the janitor and said, if during work hours I ever see the restroom is closed, you are delaying productivity. To me, that did two things. One was the obvious one, that everybody started getting a sense of ownership, right? Saying, okay, I'm responsible. Second thing is start asking the question, what is business value? What business value do we deliver and how can I contribute to it? To me, that was the more important conversation because it got the customer involved. It got even the everybody thinking about the customer and going, who is my customer? What business value are they expecting? How do I impact it? So I think what you are, the answer lies in the question itself, is what does the customer perceive as being the business value which they are looking for?
Thanks, Sanjeev. Archana?
Yeah, I would, given that I've worked most of my career with SI providers, I'll kind of give that view. So, productivity is something which is important, and it's tracked, and people do consider it and bring that up in the conversations with the clients with whom we work. But to Sanjeev's point, saying that how much ever, let's say, the SI provider has done well, if the end customer is not satisfied by it, and if it's not something what the end customer wants, no amount of great work done by SI provider is going to help. And I think as SIs, there is that responsibility that we have where we should have that conversation with our clients, where in case they haven't thought about that business value, we should force them to think in that direction and make sure that happens, so that we don't get stuck into the fact that, hey, I have done my job, I have done my great job, I don't care what happens with the other SI provider in the ecosystem, or I don't really know what my customer is looking for because I am a SI shielded from the end user or the end customer. Moment you get into that, you are falling into a trap where you might be doing great work, but it's not going to help the end customers because you don't really know what they value. So increasingly, you will see SIs having those conversations. And I would urge people from SIs who are listening to this, in case you're not having those conversations, please do go and have those, because that's going to help you in the long run.
Excellent point, Archana. So I think we have come to the end. We have more or less covered the whole area. And thanks again, all of you, for giving us this time, um, for everyone to gain from your experience and knowledge. So thanks, Sanjeev. Thanks, Archana. I think the others had meetings immediately, so had to jump off. But I think it was productive for me.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Niladri. Thanks for inviting.
Thanks, Niladri. Thanks for having me.